wait any longer to get started. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Women's Fund of Rhode Island for our last Cocktails and Conversation session this year, which is on unpacking privilege. To start off with, I'd like to acknowledge and honor the federally recognized Narragansett tribe, as well as the Niantic, Wampanoag, and Nipmuc nations on whose traditional territories the Women's Fund of Rhode Island operates. I'd also like to thank the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities for providing stipends for all of our speakers this year throughout the Cocktails and Conversation series. The council seeds and strengthens public history, cultural heritage, civic education, and community engagement for all Rhode Islanders. I would also like to thank Bryant University for co-hosting tonight's event and providing our moderator. Now let me introduce and thank our gender equity champion sponsor, IGT, who has had a part literally in sponsoring all of our Women's Fund's events and activities this year. Kim Lee, Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion, would like to say a few words on behalf of tonight's program and IGT. So Kim.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Ellie. We are absolutely thrilled and privileged to sponsor this program. Kelly and Ellie will know that when we kind of looked at our sponsorship of the Women's Fund of Rhode Island, it was pre-COVID, and it certainly was before the world erupted around us, looking at the issue of systemic racism, police brutality, and the work that we all have to do as a global community to combat this together. So to be here with all of you today to sponsor this is especially relevant to us as IGT. I want to thank many of my colleagues from IGT who are on this phone as we grappled as a community with how to address the issue of anti-racism and how to address systemic racism. One of my colleagues who is on the phone today, she does on the line today, but she doesn't know that I know she's here, Ashley Richards, pointed out to us that we really have to proactively address the issue of privilege, and we all have it. And so to be able to engage in this conversation with such a diverse representation of panelists today is indeed our pleasure. My hope, not just as a member of the IGT community, but as a board member of the Women's Fund of Rhode Island proudly, is that we all take something away from this and proactively contribute to the communities where we are members or employees and work on this together. So with that, we are just, again, privileged to be here and happy to sponsor this event.
Thanks, Kim, and thank you also for your board leadership. It's been a wonderful experience for us so far. All right, so unpacking privilege. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kelly Nevins, and I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Fund of Rhode Island. I would describe myself as white, cisgendered, heterosexual, middle-aged, middle class, and fully body-abled. I use she, her, hers pronouns. At times, hearing about white privilege or male privilege or white male privilege or even white female privilege can sting. Haven't I or haven't we worked really hard to get to where we are? Tonight's session seeks to identify privileges we may not even know that we hold as a way to highlight racism and other inequities in our society. We'll also explore ways to share that privilege, creating a more equitable society for everyone. Tonight's moderator is Eileen Kwesiga, who is a professor at Bryant University and somebody who has been studying and teaching and really an expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. She's going to briefly introduce our panelists tonight, but the brief introductions of Eileen and all of the panelists won't do them justice. So we do encourage you to look at the slides that you'll be seeing throughout the presentation this evening, and you can learn more about them. And without further ado, I will turn this over to Eileen.
Kelly, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I really don't know whether anybody can become an expert. Diversity is a lifelong journey of learning and experiencing. Now, welcome everybody. We are so popular at 5:30. That is very good to see. My students who join in under the title, under the gumption of cocktails and conversation, I will not be sending any online coupons, so you are here to learn, and it's going to be a really, really great experience. So before us, we do have really great, not to use these terms lightly, I know they have been used a lot on the campaign trail, amazing women who are going to really enlighten us this evening. We have Rachael Gavin. She is the CEO and founder of Prism Resistant Coalition. And she has done a lot of interesting, amazing things. So please do look at her bio. And something that stood out to me, in addition to being a researcher, facilitator, educator, doing this important work in our communities and organizations, she also was deported unexpectedly from London back in 2019. So talk about a woman who has lived through experiences. And based on that, she started this organization that she's heading now. Rachael will get to touch on that and the interesting work she's doing. Also, we do have Dr. Gwendolyn Howard, Minister Emerita of St. Paul's Universalist Church. When you think you have been through, it's amazing to also hear the stories of other women who have been through a lot. Gwendolyn was born to blind parents, and she has a younger sibling also who is blind. Herself also, she was born with visual impairment. That did not stop her. Gwendolyn went on to achieve all the degrees you can think of. She has an undergraduate, MS in social research, and finally, also at the peak, at the pinnacle, she has a doctorate also as well. She has encountered all kinds of discrimination also as a minister in her profession. She was let go because of her gender. And now, so as a trans woman, she is living her best life. Her spouse works at Brown University, and she's going to share about her journey and the work that she does. Last but not least, we have a student who is also a game changer at her university, Zoe Kupetz, a Brown University student, born in LA, upper class, heterosexual, cisgendered, able-bodied woman from LA she knows she was born in privilege, and she became aware of it in 7th grade after attending a session, and which started a whole journey for her unpacking her whiteness. So nowadays, what does she do? She seeks to empower and have conversation with other students, for them to understand what it is that they carry and how systems of power and privilege do impact us in our daily lives. I am not doing justice to their bio, so please do go back and look and see these phenomenal women who are going to engage us tonight, what they are all about. Without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into what we are here for here tonight, unpacking privilege. So I'm going to start by asking our panelists, we all have thrown around this term privilege, right? We think we know it. What is it? Who has it? How do you acquire it? How do you increase, or does it lessen? So what is their definition of privilege? So I'm gonna open it up to my 3 panelists if they can walk us through what they believe this term means. Anybody jump in?
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can, Rachael.
Awesome. Yes. Yeah, so I would really say that my definition of privilege is around it being unearned, either in status or in power. And just as the second part of the definition is really the fact that that privilege allows you to access a certain level of power, right? So power that you didn't necessarily have to work for, you were either born into or benefit from a system because of that level of privilege. So I really like to gauge privilege based on the capability to not think about the fact that you have it. That's really how deep and how much gravity there is in thinking about privilege.
Okay, thank you for getting us started, Rachael.
Yeah, I would add also that people who identify with dominant groups receive or possess unearned societal privilege, and that comes at the expense to folks from marginalized groups. So privilege is a relational thing. And I think it's also important, it's been important for me in my understanding of privilege to note what it isn't, and that I think privilege is not a monolith, and it's also not a dichotomy. So one can experience privilege, societal privilege in certain parts of their identities, and also experience marginalization and oppression in other parts of their identities.
Okay.
That's absolutely true, I think. Let me give you a story to illustrate that. When I decided to go back to school in 1999 to Boston University, I was feeling put upon, I was feeling defensive, I was not feeling very good having lost my career because of being an out trans woman. And just as I started going to school, I heard about the story of Rita Hester, a young African-American trans woman in Boston who was murdered. And they've never found who her murderer was. And I realized the moment I heard of her story that while there's much we had in common, I was a safer person just for being white. And since that day, that's had a profound effect on how I look at lots of things in the world, including my desire to be an activist, just because there is more I can do than other people, and I'm safer than other people I know.
Well, thank you to our panelists for opening that up for us, because many times I've heard of comments such as, I work hard and my family did not have anything, so don't tell me I have privilege. So that's a good foundation of knowing that, for all of us, privilege sometimes, most of the time, sometimes also, I know I'm confusing myself, but also includes components of things that you didn't do anything to earn. Thank you very much for setting the foundation. Now, Gwen, you're gonna be the first one now to take this one too, if you don't mind, after having spoken too soon. So a lot of people associate privilege with wealth and skin color. And I think that's what I thought before too, before I got into diversity work. Can you talk about privilege or lack thereof of trans and disabled people?
Sure. I'll start with folks with disabilities. Perhaps this is the best place to begin. How many people who are here right now have complained recently about being in a Zoom meeting? Oh, please, I know you have. Yet, because this is a Zoom meeting, it makes it much more likely that I could be here tonight. If it weren't for Zoom, I'd have to try to get a ride from somebody, or, hope that I could find some kind of transportation, which very likely wouldn't exist. One of the things that the privilege of being abled lets you do is go any place without having to think about, is the door wide enough for me to fit? Are the aisles big enough for me to go through? For disabled people, this is a real issue. When I go to order something as mundane as fast food, this has happened to me. I can't read the sign behind the counter, the big signboards that places usually have. So I have to ask, what do you have today? What's the special, whatever. And I've been treated as if I were illiterate. I once had someone behind a counter take money out of my wallet for me because they thought, since I couldn't read, obviously I had some other kinds of issues going on. Give you a couple of quick stories. I like dealing in story because I think that makes things more concrete. Recently, last year, I took a trip. I flew out of Logan Airport, and I decided with some reluctance to use a white cane. I don't often do that, but I also don't like tripping over things, and so it makes it easier for me not to do that. I got to the counter, the airline employee who was boarding people, who would soon be boarding people, and I just asked, is the flight on time? She looked at the cane and said, well, you could have boarded early, but it's such a wonderful thing that you chose not to. Now, when I board with other people, it means I spend a great deal of time trying to find those tiny little numbers and not seeing them. So I'm standing in the aisle with baggage, blocking everyone else from getting to their seat. It's really inconvenient for everyone. But suddenly I was supposed to be a more noble human being because I didn't rely on disability. That's very common. In a more serious vein, one of the stories that's been with me for many years, as you heard, my family is blind, which is kind of unusual. We were known in our neighborhood for that. I remember in my late teens walking with my dad, and at one point, this car full of, I could hear teenage male voices in the car laughing, jumped the sidewalk and came toward us. I had to pull my dad out of the way or he would have been hit. And I know from far too much experience that had they actually hit my dad, their excuse would have been, well, he didn't see us, he walked out in the street, and there would be no one to argue with that. So there are lots of issues around disability that people don't think of. And as far as being a trans woman goes, give me a second. I took the title seriously. I did bring my own cocktail.
Make us jealous, Gwen. Make us jealous. Yeah,
I'm prepared. But I wanted to say, not so much a trans 101. You can find that anywhere. That's easy. Instead, what the aspect of privilege I wanted to talk about was the assumption that most trans women find, especially from white cisgender women, is that well, you were all raised with male privilege, so you don't really understand, and B, you don't share women's experience, so you don't understand, and so to say that trans women are women is erroneous. I get this from a lot of liberal white women. Hillary Clinton said something very much like this not that long ago. Say two things about it. One, to kind of paraphrase Laverne Cox, when you're growing up and you know that you're not male, but you're presumed to have male privilege, you can't begin to know how frightening it is that someone's going to find out that if you actually were to use that privilege and then they knew who you really were, how much trouble you'd be in. So you don't ever really get to use that privilege in the first place. And secondly, as far as lived experience goes, that is sort of true, but no two people's experience is exactly the same. And I will say that more trans women than you realize have been subject not only to violence, but even to sexual assault. My own experience was as a teenager, and I was assaulted for acting like a girl. So it's a privilege for people to assume that your existence doesn't have to be questioned. I think I've spoken enough, and I will get back to my cocktail.
Now, that's a powerful statement you're closing with, so really, it's important. And we'll come back, and please, for all our viewers, feel free to type in your questions. Also, if you want to ask Gwen something in particular, you can also use the chat as well. Kelly did announce, please do not be jealous of Gwen. If you want to get a drink, please go ahead and do. My students, you're only can get milk, OJ, or something age appropriate. Otherwise, we'll have a discussion in class. And Dr. Ingve is right here, Amir, so she is on the panel too watching. So But with that said, enjoy your bev of choice. The next question will go to Zoe, if you don't mind. And Zoe, there's something also, if you feel you can tackle, please go ahead and pick it to a question from the audience. So I'll first ask you the question I want to ask, and then I'll tag on the audience question too as well. So Zoe, you define yourself as someone who has immense privilege, right? And just thank you for being able to talk about that, because that's something, first of all, I applaud you for that. A lot of people are really uncomfortable talking about their privilege. And also someone who has found a passion and strives to leverage your privilege to support movements for systematic change. And that's where I'm hoping all my students who are here tonight will be able to do. So can you please talk about how you realized you had privilege and what you're doing with it? And with that also, I want to tag this question from the audience where they're asking, is it okay or should white people have a safe space alone? India, are you listening? Safe space alone to explore white privilege. And, and I sort of get it, because a lot of my students have told me they're so scared to ask a question in this movement, and they feel everybody of color will pounce on them, and all the minorities and tear them to shreds. So how do we navigate that? Or is that privilege too in itself, asking for a safe space? So Zoe, you have it.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the personal, and then I might have you just repeat the next question. But yeah, so I think as Rachael mentioned, I think one of the main aspect of privilege is not really being aware that you have it, and really a lack of awareness of positionality and identity. And that was certainly true for me. Growing up, I knew I was white. I knew that I had class privilege. I went to private school. But I don't think I really engaged in critical conversations with my family or at school, really didn't think about how those identities shaped the way I moved through the world. And it wasn't until I was in 7th grade when I went to an affinity space, a white affinity space, and the facilitator posed this question. And this question has stayed with me. He said, every morning I wake up and I ask myself, what do I not have to think about today? What do I not have to think about today? And that was really a powerful moment for me, realizing the work that I hadn't been doing. And it was from that point on that I decided that I wanted to make a commitment to learning and unlearning, which is a constant ongoing process that I'm continually engaging in around my complicity in systems of violence, and thinking critically about how my identity shaped the way I show up in the world and what I'm doing to unlearn and learn harmful behavior, and to show up better in spaces. And so I guess going into the second part of that, I think it relates to kind of how I see like leveraging my privilege. So I kind of think of leveraging privilege in 3 main buckets for myself. And one of those is self-education. So I think, like I said before, that's like learning and unlearning about my complicity in systems of violence. And systems of violence and oppression run so deep. And that work is really difficult and ongoing. So I'm certainly not there. I haven't arrived, but it's that commitment to continuing to learn and grow. And that means in my interpersonal relationships, how can I better show up for my friends, for folks who possess marginalized identities, and then also how am I showing up in spaces where I'm working for systemic change? And so having that introspective lens, that critical lens, and then when folks are brave to share feedback with me or criticism, to be able to take that and learn and grow from that. The second bucket would be kind of creating spaces in the communities I'm a part of to have these critical conversations about power and privilege. And that's especially, I see the work of educating other folks with privilege, other white folks, other class privileged folks. And I think part of that is like, as someone who possesses so much societal privilege, I have the ability to call people in and expend that energy and labor, having these difficult conversations and engaging in like education work. So that's another thing. And then the third one is showing up when I'm asked, when there are calls for allies to go to a protest, to sign a petition, to whatever that is, to really try to the best of my ability, show up for those things, and also to give materially to grassroots BIPOC-led movements, and to engage in that kind of like wealth redistribution. So I guess that's kind of how I've thought about my own privilege throughout my life, and it's certainly evolving constantly, and I'm constantly, learning and growing around that. And then I guess the question about the spaces for white folks, safe spaces, I would challenge the safe part of it, because I think part of being possessing privileged identities is that spaces are catered to make, like, for example, to make white folks feel good. That's what we constantly exist in. And part of doing this difficult work is putting yourself in a situation, in a position where you feel uncomfortable, and that, like, unlearning anti-racism is never going to be easy or comfortable for white folks. And like, we need to lean into that, and we need to call each other into that work. I think I see the role of white affinity spaces as we as white folks need to be educating each other and holding each other accountable to doing this work. And I think as we learn, there is benefit to being just with white folks, so that if people have questions and we're working through things, it's not actively causing harm to folks of color in the space. And we're not asking people of color or people that are lower class, or whatever the identity may be, to take on that that emotional labor to do the education work they so often are asked to do in society. So I guess challenge the safe part, but I do think that there is benefits to white affinity spaces.
Wow, 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 very powerful. So some things Zoe highlighted, and I just want to repeat those: calling in. So there's a role of calling in, especially for the people with power, showing up, very important, and then writing some checks. I love that, so gotta, put your money where your mouth, is, right? So very important. So, and there was another question also, adding to that too, about, should there be safe spaces then for heterosexual male, white folks, men, and so on and so forth. So what Zoe answered to that, and I think we can also have a discussion to it, and I think there's merit, is yes, we challenge the safeness of it, because these conversations are never going to be comfortable. Even as a person of color and as a woman, I fall in several minority buckets, so it's very uncomfortable to having these conversations, or being put to deal with people's issues, be taking them on my shoulders, and everybody has something. So not causing harm, but there is also a space for, or a support where we can call each other out and have these discussions too. So I hear that, and feel free to comment on the chat too if you have some questions. I can barely keep up here. So, but let me move to Rachael. And Rachael, you have done a lot of work with your career combating racism and getting white people to recognize and dismantle their privilege from an anti-racist lenses. So can you talk about how that process works, some challenges you have faced, and please throw in the 2019 incidents too. Feel free to, so yes, you have the floor, Rachael.
Thank you. I had a feeling that would come up again. I guess that's a good starting point. The reason I really decided to found PRISM, Resistance Coalition, I had been in this work, mostly facilitating and building curriculum, doing research, more on the academic side. And I was on a student visa, doing my master's degree in London, and offered a sponsorship, and then decided to take that sponsorship. And 3 weeks before, the company decided they didn't want to sponsor me anymore. So I left the country. So I was not overstaying my visa, with the intention to return for the 3 months that US citizens are allowed to be in the country legally without a visa, and collect my things before I came back to the US. And the immigration officer essentially said, I don't know for sure that you're not going to overstay your visa. I showed her all of my documentation about how my student my experience as a student was being extended. She more or less said, it's not my fault that you didn't finish your studies in time, and it's not my fault that your visa's over. And I said, well, legally, I have 3 months to be in the country as a US citizen before I have to return to the US. I know that legally because I've been traveling back and forth to the UK for years. And she looked at me and said, that's up to my decision. It doesn't matter what you say to me. I don't care about the documentation. You need to leave, and we're going to put you in holding. So I rebutted and began pulling documents from every which way, to which she responded, you have 30 days from today to leave. I've marked it in your passport. And if you don't leave in 30 days, you'll never be allowed into the UK again. At this time, I had my entire life and all of my belongings and my networks and my research and my degree all in the UK, and no money to come back to the US or nowhere to live when I got back. So that experience really put me in a position where I was constantly, I was already doing these things, but exacerbated my eagerness to really reflect, question and challenge policies and systems that exist, but then also to drive and change them. And so that's how PRISM was really founded. We focus on restructuring policies and systems and structures to be more equitable and to reflect the experiences of folks who maybe don't have the privilege of just coming home and returning to a house or money or a job or any of those things that weren't available to me and so many other people who go through similar experiences in way worse scenarios. I was extremely privileged to be myself and in the space that I was at the time. With regard to kind of what that process looks like and what the resistance is that we face, it's definitely most of the time folks not acknowledging, specifically white folks not acknowledging or not recognizing that racism is systemic. And even the incident of my deportation was likely a result of that system being systemically discriminatory and racist. And so then pushing folks even further, specifically white folks, to acknowledge that they benefit from that system. That's where I find the most resistance in my work. But I also find that it's the most impactful way to push things forward. So when white folks are ready to step into that acknowledgement, it allows us to reimagine everything that we know. We always say oh, well, this is a legality. That's a huge thing in my work. This is the legal requirement for this document. Yes, but what has never been said or thought of or structured in businesses as we know them now that will better serve marginalized people, that being BIPOC people, that being differently abled people, that being trans people, that being anyone belonging to the LGBTQIA community, and so much more. What are we doing to reimagine what is possible in business, and how does that correlate to how we exist outside of our professional lives? Because I really want folks to deny the notion that personal and professional are two separate things. That does not allow for marginalized people to show up as their full selves. And it's actually extremely harmful. And so I think the biggest challenge that I have is really getting people to detach themselves from those systems, and even just the system of professionalism. What is that? What does it look like? What does it entail? And who does it oppress? So kind of just really building backwards instead of forwards with the folks that I work with.
Very, very well said, Rachael. And actually, I think you're addressing some of the questions. We have some questions. We are having discussions and rebuttals and stuff on chat. People who agree with white affinity spaces, others heavily disagree. So it's back and forth. We can have multiple sessions just on this topic, So, and I'm glad this is the time, this is the environment, and we are all of us engaged. We can only learn and make our communities better. So, Rachael, to what you said, somebody was questioning, and which just seems like the judge was exercising here, is professional privilege, right? These systems are built to support, and empower certain, people, whether it's race, class, and so on and so forth. Would you say that? Somebody was asking about that? We can bestow privilege based on class, definitely, right? That happens a lot in our communities. Now, somebody is asking, there are a couple of questions here asking about allyship. Any one of you panelists can answer. So how do you advocate for somebody who has less privilege than you without also getting into a space of where now you're speaking for the other? So how do you do that where somebody cannot represent themselves as a white ally? How do you constructively do that? That's one question, and there's another one too. I'm going to throw two out there so you can think about them and you can answer anyone first. Somebody also asked, which I thought was very interesting, some of my woke white friends are often the hardest to engage with constructive conversation about things like formative allyship. Any thoughts to share how to engage them in productive conversation? So let's take those two and see where we head off to from there. Any one of you can take them on. What do you think? Or should I repeat them? I know I talk for a living, so I just can keep on talking. So just let me know if I need to repeat them. Yeah. So the first one was on how to be a better ally, and especially if you are a white person and you're trying to represent somebody, maybe a minority who has less privilege than you. So how do you make sure you're doing it in an effective way and you're not overstepping your bounds? Okay. So how do we do that? Rachael, thank you.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think that this is probably one of the most common questions that I get asked in my work. And I think it's a difficult question to answer because it looks different for everyone. Like every person of color is going to have a different threshold for where they want you to step in and speak on their behalf. And some folks just don't want you to do that at all. And so I think it's really building up the stamina to be wrong sometimes, for people to put you in your place about speaking on their behalf and being like, okay, this is where this person falls with this conversation, but also like gauging and asking. We recently had this conversation in a training that I was in. Some folks were like, well, I just don't know because I spoke on behalf of this person. And then she stopped me in the middle of my sentence and said, I can speak for myself. And it then comes back to reimagining how these things have to go, right? Like, what does it look like to say, hey, do you want me to step in on your behalf? Because 9 times out of 10, if you ask the question, they'll tell you yes or no. And so I think that is oftentimes a really good approach. If it's in person, I think that those things can shift if we're talking about like social media or things like that. I only speak from my personal experience, but when I'm seeing something discriminatory, et cetera, on social media, specifically if it comes from a white person, I am expecting a white person to respond because I'm living that experience, and there are folks who are living a way more marginalized experience than me. It is also then my place to step in when those conversations are harmful and take up this space and respond on their behalf. So I think it depends on the context, it depends on the space that you're in, but it never hurts for you to literally just ask, like, do you want me to take this on? And that gives people the space to say yes or no.
That is just beautiful, right? When in doubt, ask, right? Ask. So it's contextual, but if you're in a position to ask, you definitely should. Now, let me move to another question, and I think we'll come back to that topic of being better allies towards the end. And this goes to everybody, my panelists. We are at a particular point in time, and there seems to be a new reckoning about one's privilege. So what are some of the ways that we can explicitly share our privilege with those who don't have it? Zoe, are you thinking about it or not? You look like you're ready to say something. Please do,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things I'm thinking about is like, if we go back to, I think how Rachael began by like defining privilege, like privilege is the result of systems that are built to benefit a certain group of people. And so I think instead of thinking, oh, how can people with privilege share our privilege? How are we dismantling the systems that create the conditions where some people are experiencing privilege at the sake of other people? And I think, so I guess that's just like a slight reframing. And I think within that, one of the things is like decentering yourself, which I think also comes to like the performative allyship, or like is like, or even like when thinking about allyship is like that it's really not about you or like the person that's being the ally, and it's really hard, but sometimes that means like getting called out and having like the resilience to continue to engage in the work. So I'll just like add that on, but I think, yeah, decentering yourself or people with privileged identities and creating space for other folks who have been marginalized to take that space. And I think also going back to like giving materially, like if you have the means, really thinking critically about wealth redistribution and yeah, engaging in that kind of like systemic work as well.
Wow, very powerful. Any additions? Dr. Gwen, do you have anything you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I would just underscore everything that's been said. I've been in far too many situations where people have chosen to speak on behalf of the trans community who aren't trans and get it wrong, without ever asking me or any other trans person, should I say something here? Is this appropriate? And with trans folk, we have a particularly difficult history with people telling our stories for us, and they're almost always wrong. This is an ongoing problem, and part of it is the need a lot of folks of the majority culture have of wanting to be everyone else's savior. And I would ask that folks with privilege always question their motives for any action they're about to take to, with, or on behalf of someone with less privilege than them. Why are you doing that?
That's a deep question right there, right? You know, are you doing it to enhance your resume, or is it because you really care? You know, wow, yeah, that's thought-provoking. A lot going on. You just thought you're gonna come in for a good extra credit, or, you know, 1 hour of hearing something that you already know, but you are really unpacking a lot here. So I really like that, Zoe and Dr. Gwen. Now, last question for all, and we can keep going if people have the time. What actions do you recommend for people looking to do the work? Then there's a lot of work here. We're talking about dismantling systems, you know, learning how to be better allies, not to speak for others, questioning our motives, you know, so there's a lot going on here. So are there any specific readings or videos you'd recommend? You know, so what actions, and do you have any material, or can you give us pointers on where people can go look at or join if they're looking to continue or to start doing this work? Feel free to invite us to your organizations and the talks that you are having, books you have written. This is the time, please. Yeah. Rachael, sorry.
I'm happy to jump in here. So I'm working in collaboration right now with another organization, Diversity Talks, and we are providing anti-racism training for organizations that care to be on that journey of anti-racism work. This work is specifically targeting white folks with the framing in mind that this country is built through a white dominant lens. And so the way that we experience what's happening and the systems and structures and all of those things in this country are generally always through a white dominant lens. But it does create space for everyone to push their thinking. So I think that's definitely a resource, and that can be found on my website. But I also just want to encourage folks. I think that there are so many readings going around in terms of like people who are writing books on anti-racism right now, and all these like videos and different things that are coming out. And I think that those are awesome for language and understanding. But I think, well, I don't think, it's a historical fact that this country does not properly represent in any kind of ethnocentric curriculum, which is like the history of the people who are being oppressed. As Dr. Gwen said, like the folks who have been marginalized are never properly represented in our education system in this country. And so I would just urge people to step outside of the authors they know. Are you paying attention when you are reading, like any kind of art, when you're doing research in your career or in your academic studies? Like, are you making sure that you're sourcing historical articles and information from people of all identities and not just white cis people? I think that's a huge one. But then also to get into the readings of some of the folks who have been oppressed, specifically when it comes to anti-racism work. I'm talking about like people like Assata Shakur, who are #1 on the FBI's most wanted list, but no one knows the context of why or how or what happened. And there's just so much information in those kind of historical reads that aren't on the radar purposely in this country, that can be really valuable. So I just want to encourage people to really seek outside of what you know, to expand kind of your thought process in general.
I would also encourage people, well, two things. One, I forgot to mention, I'm on the board of TGI Network of Rhode Island, which is the statewide support and advocacy group for people who are trans or non-binary. So support organizations like that, figure out where those organizations are and support them. But I would like to suggest, rather than a reading, I would like to offer people the opportunity to do something to be experiential about this. Let's say go for a full week without use of a car and experience what life, just some small aspect of life for someone with a disability or someone who is in a lower class than you are. Just one thing, try that and see. Try to feel the experience, develop your own empathy of it.
Wow, that's a really quick way to develop empathy too, right? Going without, it's really powerful. Zoe, you have something?
Yeah, I was just gonna first say it's really been an honor to be on this panel with the other panelists and with you as the moderator, so thank you. And just wanted to say, along with the readings that Rachael recommended, to encourage you to like ask a friend or a family member to engage in that work with you, to bring other people into doing that. And I'm going to post the links to like 6 local Providence organizations that I would just encourage to like keep up with what they're doing. And then again, if you're able to support them financially. And then I'm also going to put my email in the chat. And so there's so many resources lists out there for different books and articles on different topics and stuff. And also if there's a particular topic that you want to learn more about, I'm happy to either share resources that have been helpful to me or to ask others for recommendations. So.
Thank you so much. Just a wealth of wisdom from our 3 panelists. And make sure you don't log out without looking at the resources that are being offered on the chat. Now, I promise you now the last question, okay? So what actions do you recommend for, no, I'm repeating that one. Do you have any recommendation for how people can be better allies? And I think somebody also started us off. Yes, they did. Rawley did started us off on the chat by saying even the correct use of people's pronouns is so important in this ally work. If you don't know, use their name, right? So that is very important. So that's a start for us. So what other suggestions do you have for us on what people can do? In addition to everything you have shared. Anything else in closing? And we are going to try and do all of this. So I'll be looking for at least, if all of us can look at least one organization and do something, or try to what Gwen recommended to us, to just try and do without, that really will start moving us. So anything else do you think we should give to our audience before we close?
I appreciate your bringing up the pronouns. I hate to be the one to do that, so I'm glad someone else did. because I'm always the one who does that. But also from wearing my hat from the disability community, I would ask people to unpack their metaphors once in a while. How often I've seen people say, well, I hear you or I see you. Well, I don't necessarily see you. How many times is vision used for when we mean someone has a plan or I'll stand with you? We need to just think of ways in which we're using other people's life experience as an inappropriate metaphor. Just be mindful of your language.
Very powerful. Very powerful. I think Kelly is also asking, what haven't the speakers had a chance to share that they'd like us to know about this topic? Is there anything else? I'm sure I just had asked specific questions. What else would you like us to know? Also, I mean, we are hungry. We want all of this, we really want we can have everything that you have, but what else can you give us in this space?
Yeah, I'll step in here because I think I saw someone respond to some of the things that I was saying earlier. What about experience of people coming from other countries? I was surfacing those specific contexts of the US because that's what the training that I'm currently running focuses on. But that's with the experiences living internationally and doing this work internationally and recognizing like how different these systems look, even though they all fall within the system of racism. They can just be modeled so differently. But I do want to surface and highlight how important it is to be doing those learnings on the front of, as many places as you can to your capacity, and not just the US.
Okay, thank you for that, Rachael.
Yeah, I guess just to add on to the question about allyship, or I think sometimes like allyship is like an identity. So sometimes I think it can be more helpful to think about like operating in solidarity, because that's like an action. And it's like, I think it's easy to like determine or call oneself an ally, which like might feel good for folks that have privileged identities, but to really think about this is like every action I take is an opportunity to operate in solidarity or to engage in anti-racist behavior. And I think in some ways that can be kind of liberating because there's always a new opportunity to step up, as with everything, every new opportunity. And I would just say that from my own experience, I think there's so much to unlearn, and privilege. I think growing up in this society, there's a huge lack of awareness. And as I think Rachael said earlier, like our education system certainly doesn't represent the voices and the histories of marginalized people. So there's a lot to learn, and I would just encourage folks who want to show up better, and this is also a call to myself, is to listen, do the best to listen, to seek out resources, and to be okay with making mistakes and getting called out, and to continue to try to be better and learn and grow. And I think, that's all we can do.
And show up for people. I mean, have you been to a rally in support of immigrant rights? Have you been to a march for Black, queer, and trans women? Have you been to whatever? Don't just read a book, but show up.
Wow.
And if
Well,
I will just, oh, sorry.
Oh, who is that? Is that Rachael? Rachael, please go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was just going to add one more thing. I'm kind of building off of Zoe, giving money to organizations, but also where you're spending your money in general. Like, where are you getting your laundry detergent from? Is there somewhere else that's owned by a marginalized folk that could be benefiting them in a much greater way than it's benefiting a multi-billion-dollar company that doesn't need your like $5. And so, as Zoe said, like thinking of every single thing as an action that can contribute, thinking about your money that same way, as much as you are capable of, can be such a powerful tool in that wealth redistribution as well.
Wow, wow. I really don't want to end, but it's that time. I just really, really, really want to thank our panelists. They took the time. This is not an easy subject, and they put themselves out there to share their experiences and to enlighten us this evening. Just thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I think I represent everybody else here saying just thank you. This was, this was something that all of us are going to live with. It was a very, at 5:30, I don't know what you guys are doing, but this is usually, I'm doing something not meaningful. But thank you also for our audience for spending the time with us. And this was just an appetizer. So let's go out there and really start doing some of these things that they're already championing. Let's be part of the community, to do these things and to turn the dial on these issues. So thank you to Women's Fund for availing and bringing these conversations to Bryant University. We are working very hard also trying to spread the message and do the right things also at Bryant. And this is the beginning of series of many other things that we are doing. Thank you, IGT, for your support. And just thank you, everybody who is here tonight. Just thank you for being here. This was important. And
Yes, I agree. And I'd also like to add our thanks to you, Eileen, for moderating this program this evening. For those of you who are not familiar with the Women's Fund of Rhode Island, our mission is to invest in women and girls. We do that through research, advocacy, grant making, and strategic partnerships designed to achieve gender equity through systemic change. And there is no gender equity when we don't have equity in other areas. So that's really why this type of program is really important. I've noticed that some of you found our website and have signed up to receive our information. I've been getting a slew of notifications of new people joining our email list. So thank you for that. And for those of you who want to learn more about us, you can go to our website at wfri.org. We are near the end of our program year. We do have one more public program that we are doing on October 27th, which is next week. And we are doing a women's basic financial wellness program. So one of our board members who also happens to be a banker is going to be walking through the things that women can do to protect their financial future. It's a free program and we hope that you'll join us, and you can learn about all of our upcoming events, including our Right to Vote and Radical Women exhibit that's being hosted by the Hera Gallery now through November 14th. So not quite a program, but certainly if you are in South County, something we'd love for you to join us with. And just again, echoing all the thanks for all of you being here this evening. Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. You were fabulous. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.